last month I was messing around with the new cloth engine in the latest versions of Cinema 4D, and I thought it would be really, really awesome to apply some landscape textures to it. And as I was working with it and just firing away, creating the scenes, I ended up getting some really cool results, and I created a couple different variations of the scenes I didn't post, and I thought it would be really, really great to run over it and create a tutorial on it. And especially this scene, this shot here, I love how large in scale it feels. It looks like you're looking at the Grand Canyon or something, and it's not. It's just some cloth. And this shot's really cool as well. So I thought it would be awesome to run over this today and show you how simple it is. We just use cloth and some mega scans. I'm not really going to go over placing this rock in here because there was just luck. I just thought, oh, do you know what? I could get away with putting a rock scan in there, so I did. But we'll just work on the textures. Now, I was just mulling over the tutorial beforehand, and then I went to make sure nobody had done anything similar, and I saw that this lad here, Ian Frederick, had created something drastically similar earlier in the year, utilizing Houdini. Now, it's more kind of crystals, but he did it utilizing Houdini, but it is quite a similar look, and I just thought I would point it out before I go forward with the tutorial. I think it's quite crazy that two artists, I had never seen this before, so I think it's quite crazy that, you know, two artists can pull very similar ideas out of the ethos. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the War of Art book by Stephen Pressfield. It very much touches on that kind of thing. So I thought I would just give him some, I don't want to necessarily say credit because I didn't get the idea from him, but I just want to point out that this is here, and if this is similar to your workflow, this might be a more beneficial tutorial for you. But today, we're just going to be focusing on doing this all inside of Cinema and using Megascans. So we'll get straight into it. So to begin, the first thing I'm going to do is drop in a plane, and immediately I'm going to turn off my work plane because it really irritates me. And I'm going to bring up the scale to about 2000 centimeters by 2000 centimeters. Next up, we're going to do Control D, and under the Simulation tab, you're just going to set the gravity to 0. We don't want any gravity. And then I'm going to come way out here, and we're just going to right click and add a cloth to our plane here. So all I'm doing here is setting up a simple swirling animation. Now, those of you that are more familiar with Cinema 4D and a little more advanced are going to know exactly what I'm doing here, and it's not going to seem too complicated. And this is absolutely nothing unique to this tutorial. It is quite a basic system in terms of cloth simulations. And if you want to know more about these kind of simulations, EJ from iDesign has tons of great tutorials regarding the new cloth systems in cinema. But anyway, we're just going to add a rotation. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this blue axis here, we're going to press R, and we're going to rotate that. I'm going to make sure I've got the rotation selected. We're going to rotate that 90 degrees so it's pointing up into the sky. And then under the rotation, I'm going to set the angle speed to about 5. And then we're going to go to fields, and we're going to add a spherical field. And I'm going to set the size to about 75. And then what we're going to do is go back to simulate and grab a turbulence. And then under object, I'm going to set the strength to about 50, and I'm going to set the scale to about 50, maybe 70. And then if we hit play, what's going to happen is we're going to get a basic little swirl, but it's not really going to be that powerful, and we're not really going to notice it. And that's all to do with the amount of segments here. So if we bring that up to 100 by 100, and I do NA, and play it back, you're going to see that stuff starts to happen now. But it's still not wonderful, and it's still quite flamboyant. So what we're going to do is bring up the segments even more to 200 by 200. And you're going to see it's just going to narrow things out more and more and make it behave. So much of the control here is coming from the segments. It's quite baffling, honestly. But the first thing I'm actually going to do is just bring down this turbulence a little bit. It's maybe a little bit too high. Maybe bring down the scale. Now that looks fine. If we were to, holding Alt here, drop in a subdivision and have a look at this, that looks awesome. But in terms of what we're doing here and the textures we're applying, we don't actually want this to be super duper tight. So about here, this is about as far as I'm going to go in. Maybe only about 20 frames. Maybe a little bit farther, actually. I might only keep it to about here. And a lot of this is because the displacement we're going to put on it. You don't want too many overlapping interactions between the cloth. You don't want it to get super in the nitty-gritties of the cloth kind of overlapping itself. So we're going to keep it quite tame here. In terms of the cloth simulation, that's all I'm going to do. If we were to come into the tag here and think about anything else that we could do, you can maybe bring up the bendiness to about 50, and if we play that back and have a look at that, in terms of anything else that I could change that I think would really affect it, I can't think of anything else. In terms of what I'm aiming for here, I don't really care. So all I would do now is come up to your, make sure your subdivision surface is off, come up to your cloth tag, go to cache and calculate cache. And then once that's done, we can play through here. It's going to be super ultra quick. And the main reason you want to cache this is it's going to make it much faster in Octane. That was one of the biggest issues I found when it came to using the new cloth systems in cinema, is if you don't cache it, it doesn't work well in Octane. It gets really slow. So I would always spend a lot of time here in your viewport, mastering your simulation, and then cache it before you get anywhere near going near Octane, because it's just hell. And I remember the first time I was using it and I thought, wait, I thought everybody's saying this new Cinema 4D cloth system is like Houdini and it's super quick and it's crashing my Octane. What's going on? It's because I wasn't caching it. So, little life hack for you, just make sure they're cached. Don't do what I did. But I'm probably going to leave this at about frame 20-ish. And maybe a little bit higher. I'll dance around with this a little bit. And what we're going to do next is come up here and set our renderer to Octane render. And I'm going to set this to 248 by 248. I'm getting a square aspect ratio to start creating some renders with this, although I may change that. So next up, we'll jump over to Megascans and have a look at some decent textures to use. Now, I am trying to recall some of the ones I used. The one I did use worked tremendously well. And unfortunately, this is one of those scenarios where it's very texture dependent, and you can bring in one texture and it just sucks. And then you bring in another and it looks lovely. But what I'm going to start with is this Ponderosa pine bark, because I did use that and it looked really cool. So I'm going to start out with this, and it would be nice to just break away from the whole kind of rocky thing and start out with some bark. I think that would work quite well. So what I'm going to do is just boot up Octane here and latch it on the side and let Octane fire away. I'm going to switch this to path tracing, and I'm going to lock the live viewer here. And then I'm just going to zoom out. And if you come to our render settings, I'm going to set this to 248 by 8 by 8. Then I'm going to keep hitting tab, and I'm going to come down to GI clamp, and I'm going to set that to 10. And that's about as far as I'm going to go regarding render settings. Now I'm just going to pause this for a second, and I'm going to jump up a couple frames, because one thing I am feeling like here is it was feeling a little bit flat, and I feel like I need to come up a little bit just to make sure that we're getting nice shadows once we start putting in our lighting here. So I'm just going to hit render again, and I just double click this preview of the material here to get it to show up. And what I'm going to do is just drop the material straight onto our cloth simulation here. And you're going to see off the bat, it looks really ugly. So what we're going to do is just go to our Octane node editor and fix up this material. And you will notice that I have seen some people, when they're working with their Megascans materials, not editing them, you always have to edit Megascans materials and you always have to sort them out. So what I'm going to do here is just neaten all of this up. I like to get one nice neat line for all our texture maps, and then another for our filters, and then another for our transforms. So what I'm going to do is the displacement's plugged in. I'm going to bring that up to 4K for now, and I'm going to leave it where it's at and see how that works. But under transform, I'm just going to bring that down a good old amount. Maybe even more. Okay. Now with the displacement, I'm going to bring this up to 100. And then under the mid-level, I'm actually going to bring that back down. 100 is clearly too much. So Let's bring it down to 50, and I'm going to bring the mid-level all the way back down to 0. Okay, cool. Now, I've got a feeling from the looks of this, I might have to change the projection, and we'll have a look at that, whether we do need to. Next up, I'm going to add a texture environment, and I'm going to make it black. And then I'm going to go to Objects, and Lights, and Octane Area Light. And I'm going to right-click it, Animation Tags, Target, and I'm going to target our cloth. Now I'm going to press F2, Cameras, Perspective, and I'm going to do NA. Turn off our work plane again, and I'm going to double click this top dot on the Octane sky. So what this does is give us the ability to move freely while keeping the live viewer the same. So what I'm going to do is drag this light out to the side, and now we have some lighting, but it's not powerful enough. So I'm going to set the sampling rate to 248, and I'm going to put a fall off map on it. And for now, I'm just going to set this to 90 degrees. I'm going to set the power to 1000. I'm going to make the light a little bit taller. I'm going to leave it where it's at right now. And I'm going to drop in an Octane camera. I'm going to change the focal length to 135. Come to coordinates. I'm going to zero out the X. I'm going to press tab. I'm going to leave the Y. I'm going to zero out the Z. And then I'm going to zero out the H, and I'm going to type in -90 here, and then I'm maybe going to set this to like 1500. So what we can do now is come back to our texture, and before I go any further, I'm going to save the scene. So let's do that. Okay, so once that's saved, I'm going to come back to this displacement, and I'm going to play with this a little bit. So it feels okay right now, if I am being honest, but I'm maybe going to play with the mid-level a little bit. Now, the mid-level is quite detrimental. It can really make it fold over itself here, and I don't like that at all. So I'm going to bring it back to 0. And instead, I am going to add a projection to all of them. And we'll just have a little bit of problem solving here, and I'm going to do a little bit of a dance with it in the node editor here until it hits where I want. So let's change this to box and see how this plays. And you'll often see that Octane likes to do a lot of goofy stuff when you're working with this, and it seems to be very delayed in its updates. I'm going to come away from box because it's just kind of really messed with the texture. I don't like that. I'm going to just keep bringing down the scale. I'm going to bring up the scale. Okay. That's interesting. Let's come back a bit in the simulation. Maybe I don't want those extra folds, because I think it's taking away from the texture a little bit. So we'll sit about here, and let's have a look at what happens if I turn off lock aspect ratio and bring in the X, so we squeeze it in a little bit. Okay, and then we can lock that again. And in the displacement, I'm going to mess with the displacement and put it to about 25. Now what I don't want to lose is all these dark shadows that the ridges of wood are giving me. That's what I really like. A couple of them went away, but it looked nice. So I'm going to press F2 again, and I'm going to mess with the position of this light, because right now it's blowing out the scene a little bit, and I don't really like what it's doing. Okay. So in our Octane camera, let's go to camera imager and bring up our highlight compression, and then go to post-processing and set the bloom to about 5 and bring down the glare. In fact, that's too much. Okay, we'll keep it like that. Now, I kind of prefer this lighting a little bit. What I'm going to do is just bring up our shadows now, because the shadows are way too dark. And I'm just going to duplicate the camera and have a look at this at a couple different angles and see how it looks. And I'm going to come back into the texture, and I'm going to bring the displacement to 8K now. And I'm going to try and get away with 50 again, I think. The mid-level could be useful at this point. If we were to do something like 0.05, because as we bring the mid-level down, it puffs it up a lot. So if we were to just give it a slight value, it's going to give us a bit more sharpness of the texture back. So maybe at the highest, we'll do 0.1. And that doesn't look too bad. Let's try 0.07. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. If I just take another camera angle here, get a couple looks of it. And that's quite a nice result. If anything, we could just bring down the scale a little bit. You could go back and forth with this all day. What I will do though is demonstrate another texture and we'll see how that works. But it's really a game of playing chess with the texture until it works. Simulation, super quick and easy to set up. But once you get into the nitty gritty with the texture, it's definitely a field day of playing. But you can get some really, really neat angles, and I'm sure that some of you will do some awesome stuff with this. So let's go and pick another texture to play with. So in Megascans, I'm trying to think of some of the rocks that I played with. If I go to my purchased assets, I can't actually remember what one it was. I did try one with this rocky ground. It looks okay. I thought it would be really cool with a kind of complex texture that had a lot of rocks going on, but then it just didn't. You seemed to really lose the simulation. And I actually, when I first got the idea for this, I actually took some of these Megascan models and made them cloth simulations, and the same thing kind of happened. It just didn't look super great. So, and a lot of that I think was to do with the segments. So I ended up going with a plane and then messing with it that way. Now this was the one that I used, I'm pretty sure. So let's mess with this. Let's see. That's just called Rocky Ground. Super specific. So let's load this in and see how this works. Okay, so once it's in, I'm just going to double click it to get it to load up. I'm going to do Control-Alt-S to save as incremental. And let's just drop that on the subdivision surface and get to playing. Now let's do that 3-point kind of structure again. Transform over here. Chronological maps as we go down here. And then displacement at the bottom, normal in here. And our filters there. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is bring down that scale. And next up, let's go to our displacement. We'll bring that mid-level back down to a point about 0.05. And I'm going to bring up that level of detail to 4K. And I'll bring up the height to 100. I do remember there being one of these textures I had to go absolutely mental with the displacement to get it to do anything. I'm going to keep bringing down the scale. It's clearly way too big still. I swear this was the texture I used. We'll find out in a minute. Yeah, I think it might have been. Let's bring down the height to 25. Let's try 50, that's too low. Yeah, it was. Okay, so what to do next? I'm going to play with the mid-level. Let's try 0.2. Yeah, because I think I had a higher mid-level for a lot of this, and that's where I realized that you got this tearing on the thin parts. What about 0.1? Yeah, let's stick with that. And then what I'm going to do is mess with the color correction a little bit. So I'm going to bring down the saturation, and I'm going to bring up the gamma. And I'm going to, no, bring it up too much. And then I'm going to bring down the saturation quite a bit more. So this is very similar to the texture I had now. If we were to do a quick comparison, quite similar. And let's duplicate the camera because that camera looked nice in the wood. We'll probably want to go back to that. Let's have a look at a couple different angles here. If we were to use a massive focal length, like 400, what was 1,000? You can see we get that large scale kind of feel. And if I'm to mess with the lighting here a little bit, let's see what we can do here. Let's make the light 50 by 50, and we'll bring the power up to 20,000. That's going to give us like super, super sharp shadows, which is going to be very realistic in terms of if we were in the Grand Canyon or something like that. So if you were to bring that closer, you start to get a result a little bit like this, which gives you those like really, really, really sharp shadows in each bit of the displacement. But I need to bring that to 8K now because it's not holding up. Let's just bring that tad closer to get that brightness back. And we'll see how that first camera looks, that above camera. That's definitely quite a similar result. You could add some punch to this by changing your response to DSC_5. Balance it out a little bit. Bring down that bloom again. And how does that first light look? I would say that the first one actually looks nicer. I think this is probably a good place to finish. I don't think there's much else to it besides endless tweaking until you get a nice result out of it. Between the two textures, you can see that it's really dependent on the texture at this point as to the way your result's going to look. You can do some really cool things with cameras here, and if you want, you can always add a collider in the middle, or you can just place a rock like I did, which looks awesome. But yeah, this definitely emits some cool results, and as soon as you get into nice camera angles and really leverage those big focal lengths, you're going to get nice results. So yeah, I thought this was quite a simple tutorial to do, and I thought you might appreciate just having a bit of an insight as to how I completed this scene here. And of course I did spend quite a few hours tweaking this endlessly until it looked the way I wanted it to. The more I look at this now, the more I think that it's not actually the same texture, because I can't remember how I got those lines on it unless they were a part of it. I did something. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you managed to make some awesome renders with this. I thought this was a super simple idea, and a big part of me felt like it didn't need a tutorial because it felt so simple. But I know there's beginners out there and people will appreciate this, so I hope you're able to leverage it and create some cool results from it. It really is one of those situations where you have to keep tweaking the parameters and you have to keep playing with it. You just have to keep nudging everything back and forth until you get it the way you want, and duplicating different cameras and moving lights around. But it's a super simple setup, and I'd love to see the results you get from it. So please do send me those, and go and check out my assets on my store. I'll make sure I pop up these project files for you to go and grab. And thank you for watching, and I will see you in a tutorial very soon.